From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole.
Musk got to go! Hey, hey! Ho, ho! Elon Musk has got to go!
That was the sound earlier this week outside the Boulder offices of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The Trump administration announced recently that it's terminating hundreds of jobs at NOAA. So on Monday, NOAA supporters and employees took part in a protest to push back. The threat of layoffs at NOAA recently led my guest to write a defense of the work the organization does.
A lot of times when people tell me, well, I can just get the weather on my phone. I'm like, well, where do you think that data comes from?
Bowen is an atmospheric scientist at the University of Colorado who works closely with and has her work funded by NOAA. Before working at CU, she spent 11 years as a meteorologist for the National Weather Service, which is part of NOAA. Her main argument is even if you don't know what NOAA does, you might miss NOAA services if they're slashed or privatized. She says NOAA and the data from its weather satellites are something many of us use every day.
A lot of the things that the satellites do is they're able to give us a picture of the world and the flow of things that are going on around the world. Clouds, moisture, at many different levels of the atmosphere. And we can use that as part of a lot of other information to build a forecast.
I often think of weather forecasts as something that comes from the TV news, but NOAA is a big part of it. It houses the National Weather Service. How integral is NOAA to weather forecasters?
Well, NOAA is very, very integral when it comes to building the forecast. It is a whole organization that is developed and built to better understand our global weather and climate patterns. So the information that's brought in through those satellites, through the buoys that's maintained by different parts of NOAA, by the weather stations that are maintained by different parts of the Weather Service, all come together to help develop that forecast that the forecasters in the National Weather Service then use to put out to the public.
You mentioned in your essay the difficulty of privatizing weather satellites. But one of the people leading the cuts for the federal government is Elon Musk, whose companies launch private rockets and satellites into orbit. Isn't there an argument that the privatization of weather satellites is just an inevitable next step?
It is possible, and it has been done before. But when you're talking about the infrastructure and the things that have been developed by NOAA, a lot of the planning has already happened. A lot of the satellites are already run by this federal entity. So it would be a very difficult, challenging, and time-consuming thing to recreate or transfer to other entities.
Another thing NOAA and the National Weather Service also monitor is space weather. Things like solar flares that can disrupt satellites. What is unique about this work?
Well, it's unique in that it's pretty specialized work. Not many entities are doing this, and it's becoming more and more important, not just for NOAA and the public when we're talking about communication and global navigation, but also for national security purposes. NOAA works really closely with the Department of Defense to protect military assets, plan operations, and a lot of that has a nexus with the space weather prediction entity that is within NOAA.
Carrie, you raised a point about liability in your piece that I think is worth discussing. You argue there's a danger in a private company that makes weather predictions and gets them wrong, especially if a devastating tornado or a hurricane is involved. Talk about the value of having a government organization like NOAA lead on weather forecasting.
Yeah, one of the things that I mentioned is the public good aspect of what NOAA does. And so because NOAA is taxpayer funded, its services provide safety and security for everyone. So when you're talking about privatizing things like weather warnings, a lot of companies might not want to take on the sole responsibility of issuing weather warnings and watches because of the liability that goes along with that. If someone were to be under a tornado and they were to lose their home and they did not have a warning take place, that could put a lot of liability on that company.
Sometimes I use Weather Underground, which is a popular weather app. In my neighborhood, there are maybe a handful of homeowners who have their own amateur thermometers linked to the app. I think this helps give the impression that weather data can be crowdsourced. What's your response to that idea?
I do believe that there is a small portion of weather data that can be crowdsourced and, it can be very valuable. But when you're talking about the models that the U.S. has funded through NOAA and built and utilized, like the Global Forecast System, it uses weather stations, yes, but it also uses weather stations on airplanes. It uses the buoys. It uses the satellite data. And that is not as easily replicated as just somebody putting a weather station in their backyard.
One of your key points in the article is that these cuts to NOAA's workforce are happening at a moment when we feel acutely the effects of climate change. We see intense wildfires and hurricanes regularly. Talk about your concern that these cuts could make us less prepared for the effects of climate change.
I think it's very important when we're talking about the effects of climate change. We're talking about multiple facets. We're talking about the ability to understand what's happening and how our Earth is changing. But we're also talking about how that research is utilized to make our communities prepared for that change. So NOAA does all of those things. NOAA has entities that track climate information through those buoys that measure sea surface temperatures to be able to create climate-based impactful information that then can be passed down to communities from our local weather service offices to help communities, emergency managers, city and county officials prepare for the changing climate within their cities. When we're talking about really, really high heat for a long period of time and maybe a community that's not used to having those sorts of temperatures, that are not prepared for it.
Right.
When we're talking about snow in cities that don't normally see snow, it can be crippling to a city.
Yeah.
How are these communities preparing? And that's something that NOAA does at all levels.
Well, lastly, the Trump administration's layoffs affect probationary workers, which often means people hired less than a year ago. You mentioned before the show, you have a friend who's been there 11 months and was hit by layoffs. I'm wondering, what is the mood like among your NOAA colleagues?
There's just a genuine sense that people don't fully understand the impacts this is going to have. These are very dedicated civil servants. These are people, these are your neighbors. These are your community members. They don't do it for the money. They don't do it for the prestige. They do it because they genuinely care that you're safe. When I was a weather service meteorologist, we came in, worked 14 hours if we had to, came in through thunderstorms and floods to make sure that we were supporting our emergency managers and our city county officials as well as we could, giving them the information that we could in order for them to continue to help people in our community. And when you're talking about NOAA, everybody that works within NOAA feeds that purpose. They do it because they love the work. The people that are being let go, they're leaders within this organization. They're committed and they help people make decisions. They help keep you safe. And so I just really want people, and I think people who are let go really want people to understand the potential impact this is going to have.
Carrie Bowen is an atmospheric scientist at CU Boulder who works closely with NOAA. We'll include a link to her article about the work NOAA does in our show notes and at KUNC.org. That's it today for In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening.